Hello and welcome back, and that is right, today it's time for another Should You Buy. In today's video I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you should consider buying the brand new QNAP 1U 4-bay, the TS-435XeU. But I'm also going to give you 5 reasons why you might want to give this system a miss. I'll be honest with you, QNAP have been knocking out rack mounts for quite a long time, and of all of the rack mounts they have produced, particularly in 2022, but even over the last few years, I've seen very few that have made the splash that this rather affordable rack mount has done. It's got a lot going for it, but also at the same time, in order to achieve a lot of its hardware abilities, it has had to make some silent or very low end little snipping of the old wings there in the background. And hopefully today's video will help you decide whether this affordable but incredibly capable system nonetheless is right for you or your business. Let's crack on with number 1. That is right, let's face it, you probably knew this about the box already. It's probably one of the reasons you're going for it to start with, but this device that's knocking around for about 600 or 700 nicker has got some absolutely banging network connectivity there, notwithstanding that it's got a couple of 2.5 GBE copper ports there, so again 250 to 270 meg each, or you can lag them to make it even better, but it also arrives with a couple of 10 gigabit Ethernet ports there. Now yes, these are fiber, so SFP based, but not only can you utilize them for different networks and then combine them if you choose for 20 gig, but you can also get 100 to 200 quid adapters that will change this fiber port into a copper, a 10G base T, which means you could use one of these for your local internal network and another one going to a much further away fiber connection over long distance 10 GBE fiber. Overall, in terms of network connectivity, unrivaled, and a 1U rack mount at this price point. But of course, you're not only limited to those 4 bays there on this 1U rack mount, are you? No, you can, if you choose, and remove the 5 screws in advance, remove the lid and take a good look and see that right there in the middle, we have got a couple of M2 NVMe slots inside there. That means you can install lovely, fast M2 NVMe SSDs inside this system. What can you do with them? Well, let's leave that there so you can see it without the light going nuts. One, you can use it for caching. That's the obvious one, right? Use it for read-write caching. So when you upload your files to this system, they get placed on the M2 NVMe and then later on move to the slower hard drive storage, thereby improving that performance. You can use it for read caching, where more frequently accessed microdata is copied over to the SSDs to speed up that access time later and lower latency and make it feel a lot more fluid and localized. On top of that, you can use tiered storage. Tiered storage is when the QNAP system allows you to combine the slower but large capacity hard drives with faster but lower capacity SSDs into a single storage pool, and then as files are more frequently accessed, it moves, not copies, moves the more frequently accessed data. And that can include large sequential data too, over to the SSD portions of the system, thereby improving performance with those in a way that SSD caching only really benefits micro or small INI data and 4K random. This is a great benefit to sequential chunky data. Finally, you can use them as storage pools. You can use those to create their own standalone storage pool, which you can run the system OS from, you can run individual applications or more priority containers and more, thereby leaving the hard drive space for archival large slower storage as needed, or your warm storage. Overall, having those two inside here in tandem with the 10 GBEs that we've talked about is a tremendous benefit, not only at this price point, but also the very fact that they are there and included at no additional cost via a PCIe upgrade, like the card that's ever so slightly out of shop there. Either way, that's a big old tick from me. Another often overlooked thing with this rack mount is simply that the 4 bays of storage you have inside are not the end of the road. Not only have you got those 4 bays and the 2 M2 NVMe's I just spoke about, but also, thanks to the utilization of those USB ports, you can attach expansions. Indeed, you can attach 2 expansion chassis to this in rack mount or desktop, depending on your setup. But one of the best things is you can attach 2 12-bay expansions. That is, the R1200C can be attached to this to add another 24 bays of storage for this host system to take advantage of. Now, it is going to push that CPU quite hard, but I will say that with the utilization of the 2 10GBE ports on the back, you are really going to be able to have some fun and some large bandwidth transfers attaching any number of a range of expansions to this device gradually as you see fit, whether you can use them as independent storage or combine them with the internal bays and those NVMe's, means that this is going to be a high performance system both internally and externally in terms of storage. That's right, hardware limitations when it comes to storage media is something we've only recently had to wrap our heads around in the world of the server market. Up to a point, it got when you had your own NAS server, you had to kind of pick of the gamut when it came to SATA storage drives. However, some brands have become a little bit more restrictive about compatibility and support of drives on their systems, and although there is still wide support of a lot of hard drives on most NAS systems, I would say that QNAP still maintains an incredibly open field of support on drive media. Now that comes down to a couple of different things. It can come down to them supporting everything from WD Red to WD Ultrastar to Seagate Skyhawk to Seagate Ironwolf and Exos, but at the same time that also includes support of larger capacities. In recent weeks we have seen, or at least at the time of recording, WD reveal their 22 TB series of drives, with 26 TB drives arriving as well. And those 22 TB drives are compatible with QNAP systems, and they're very quick to get those added to the support and compatibility pages there. So by going for the QNAP rack mount, you have a wider range of supported hard drives there. Now, that isn't to say that other brands don't support and utilize these drives. You can put these drives inside their systems. However, a lot of the time, the system will give you warnings about incompatibilities on these drives or change some software features to be available or not available depending on different drives. That is something that's not the case on this QNAP rack mount, and it's something that QNAP as a brand have still stayed very, very far away from changing. So with this 4-bay and indeed support of those rack mounts as well, as far as expansions are concerned, you're not going to have any hard drive limitations or support limits with this NAS. Now this is a bit cheaty given that I've kind of already made this point several times throughout the video, but I think it's a good enough point that it can stand on its own 2 feet. This thing is ridiculously good value. And I know, again, we've talked about all that hardware, but talking about that hardware on its own, when, in of itself is all fair and well, but when you find out the device, again, knocks around for about 600 to 700 nicker, this is a very well priced box. When you are including that quad-core processor, you're including up to 32 gig of memory with 4 by default. You are including M2 NVMe slots. You're including that expandability by default, and you're including a couple of 2.5G and 10G ports at that price point for a 1U half-depth rack mount. That's a joke how cheap that is. To put that into perspective, when you look at a lot of the 4-bays from QNAP and indeed other brands as well, those 4-bays, the prosumer ones, are knocking around for about 500 to 600 nicker a pop. Now, yes, they have more capable CPUs in terms of graphical fidelity with integrated graphics on a Celeron and more, but this system still arrives with a pretty darn good ARM processor for the price point and all those other hardware features. So in terms of value, I find the TS-435XeU one of the best value rack mount NASes that QNAP have ever produced. But it can't all be roses, and alongside those 5 things that I just said that were really, really good about this, we've got to talk about things that are going to make you sit on the fence a bit longer. This is by no means a perfect system, so let's talk about the 5 reasons why you might want to stay on the fence and look elsewhere for your storage. That is right. For all of my praise about value and all of my praise about the hardware architecture of this, we have to keep our feet on the ground and acknowledge that the processor inside this is still a quad-core ARM processor. Now, the TX2 that's inside here from Marvell, it's a quad-core 2.2 gigahertz processor inside there. That means that certain features and functionality are just not going to be available. So, QNAP's own virtual machine platform, virtualization station, is not going to run on this. You can use containers, but you can't use their VM tool. On top of that, there are other applications that have either been changed or swapped out to work with ARM-based processors like QVR Pro versus QVR Elite that we'll touch on later. But on top of that, there are a range of their own services that are still included, like the AI supported stuff, which don't run as well on an ARM processor there. And also, despite the fact that we've got those two 10GBE ports, despite the fact that we've got those M2 NVMe slots inside, which again, bear in mind are PCIe Gen 3x4 because of the limited lanes of that CPU and the lack of any kind of embedded graphics, meaning an HDMI out is off the table, that CPU outside of the value context is still very mid-range. It's a powerful ARM-based processor, but it still will fall short when compared to an x86 64-bit processor from AMD or Intel, which has a lot more going for it in terms of power and oomph and throughput there. So again, great value system, great value hardware, but just keep in mind that CPU is still comparatively low end compared to a lot of the Intel stuff flying around. Next up, let's talk about those USB ports, because that is something of a small concern depending on their utilization. Now, recently, QNAP have been integrating USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports on their system. That is a 10 gigabits per second USB connection there. Now, these are USB 3.2 Gen 1. That's old USB 3 or 5 gigabits per second there. Now, on the face of it, that shouldn't be a bother. One, because you can still use external drives up to about 500 megs or 450, depending on your own throughput and the drives you choose, and it's only a 4-bay to start with. And they support a bunch of different features and services that, although there's USB 2s there, we're not going to bother too much about those. There's still a lot going for it, so why am I ragging on these ports not being USB 3.2 Gen 2 other than just because it's the future? Well, one main reason, because as much as I spoke up a good game about this device's expandability, bear in mind those expansions are connected via those ports. So if you attach an 8 or a 12-bay expansion device, regardless of the number of drives in those expansion systems, they're going to be throttled to that USB because it's USB that they're connected via. Now, had this connection been USB 3.2 Gen 2, that would have been 1,000 megs to play with. But now you're going to be bottlenecking to up to 500 or so megs for that expansion device, which, although there's two ports, might be too much of a bottleneck for some who have gone to the trouble of buying a big expansion device that they're connecting via USB, but sadly finding that that external chassis is going via a pipeline that it will be limited via. This next point is a bit of a brief one, but it does hark back to that CPU. Because of the CPU inside this system, you can't use QVR Pro. You have to use QVR Elite. And I know there are some people listening to this going, isn't Elite better than Pro? In terms of the English language, it might well be. But there is one enormous difference between QVR Pro and QVR Elite, which for all of Elite's benefits in terms of efficiency and being able to run with a lower system resource impact that a lot of people don't know, and that is camera licenses. With QVR Elite, you get 2 camera licenses with the system, and it's linked to more of a subscription model for those other camera licenses. I don't know how long QNAP are going to commit to this, but unlike QVR Pro, where you get 8 camera licenses, lifetime licenses given to you by default on day one, QVR Elite has much more limited and smaller tiers to its range of camera licenses. For those that aren't aware, when it comes to surveillance software needs to be supported. You can't buy a system that's got surveillance software and then complain when they're not supporting the service 8 or 9 years down the line off of your one payment. Security, updating vulnerabilities that can be built into any kind of software or hardware, just staying on top of modern innovation and modern cameras and different techniques. It requires investment. So most NAS brands provide you a solution, and this goes for all the brands, by the way. They give you a solution and a limited number of cameras. Generally, that number of cameras starts at 2, and you get those 2 cameras and you can use the system with the software with no additional fees. But the minute you're going to go beyond that, so most homes might have a camera out the front, a camera out the back. The minute you want to use more cameras, most brands will then go, it sounds like this is a little bit more of an insurance leaning thing. It might be a business thing. Ultimately, that's a lot of responsibility for the software to have on its shoulders. So consequently, that's when the buying license model comes in. And with QVR Elite on this box, because it doesn't have the hardware to run Pro, That's a big drop between 2 camera licenses and most of what systems from QNAP that run Pro getting 8 camera licenses. Even if those camera licenses could be as little as 20 quid, and they're generally not, they knock around for about 30, that's a big price difference overall. So if you're going to look at this system for surveillance, that may be a reason for you to look at things like the 464U from QNAP instead, which is Intel powered and arrives with Pro. Now this next point needs me to remove the screws and the lid again, because yes, it's not a huge surprise that rack mounts are noisy, they just are. Whether it's because they utilise a horizontal system of cooling with no vents on the side, or that they are designed to be almost always completely metal in terms of their design, they're generally noisier. However, this system is gonna be even noisier than that. Because the system has no internal fan system and it utilises an open PSU design, because it needs to do that for cooling and efficiency, with several tactical T heat sinks built into the top there, and all of these heat sinks here, and the system running on just these 3 little fans here at the top, the result is that this is going to be really noisy for a 4-bay. It is a compact half depth rack mount 4-bay, but still nonetheless, when I had this on during my initial reviews of this, I was recording other videos with an entire room between me and it and a wall in the middle, and it was making too much noise for me to record a video. Now, let's stay relative. You're probably not recording videos while this thing's on, so it's less of a problem for you. But when it comes to rack mount devices, this is still one of the noisiest rack mounts I've ever used, and a lot of that is due to the open PSU design to have more airflow through it, but also that ARM-based CPU having to just work a lot harder, therefore raising temperatures, therefore increasing the RPM of those fans. This system is just plain noisier than other 1U 4-bay rack mounts in the market. And finally, we got to talk about it, ransomware. QNAP in 2022 had something of a ransomware problem, with the company Deadbolt continuously trying to bombard their systems to get through to people's data, get it encrypted, and make a bit of change out of people, unfortunately. Now, they aren't the only brand that have been targeted by the Deadbolt ransomware group, but a lot of people have looked at their systems in 2022 and have been slightly concerned about the company being targeted in as many ways as it has. Now, we've got to remain relative. When it comes to a lot of these attacks, sometimes the vulnerability, and in a lot of cases I would say, comes down to the vulnerabilities in Linux. All of these systems that we utilize and talk about here on the channel, the bulk of them run on Linux. They didn't develop Linux, and when Linux has a vulnerability, they patch it out, but it takes longer for these brands that have built on top of Linux to fundamentally create reparations, and not reparations, but to repair the vulnerabilities within their own systems in line with the changes and building blocks they've done on Linux. On top of that, a lot of the vulnerabilities can also be pointed at old versions of the software where that vulnerability, which, hindsight is 2020, existed in the past. And the consequence is, if people don't stay on top of their updates, they are not patching those they're not patching those vulnerabilities out with updates, and later on can be susceptible. You are invited, when you set these systems up, and this isn't just QNAP, to have auto updates automatically installed if you choose. And much like most of us aren't upgraded to Windows 11 too quickly, it's quite understandable that we don't turn that on. Then you've got the idea that to have this system even accessible in the first place by remote access hackers like Deadbolt, you have to leave it exposed to the internet. You have to connect it to your router and start punching holes in ports. Now, again, there is that element of manufacturer and user responsibility, but still, we've seen Deadbolt really focus a lot of attacks on QNAP systems, and it's not QNAP's fault there, but at the same time, there is no kidding ourselves that there still is a little bit of an association with QNAP and ransomware, that although it is dwindling and it is going away, as QNAP have made a lot of changes to their system to avoid it happening again in future, it's still a fact that we have to bear in mind. And I think a lot of users who heard about all that coverage before are going to be concerned. I can recommend that you check out all of my Deadbolt coverage, and you'll see a lot of the factors the attack vectors and how to put all of this into reasonable context exists. And this isn't QNAP just leaving the door open and going home. It really isn't the case. But still, I think we'd have to address it, that some users who are completely deathly scared of these sort of things without reading into it are going to be concerned about deadbolt and QNAP NAS here. But this has been 5 reasons why you should go for the QNAP TS-435XeU and 5 reasons why you might want to stay on the fence or go for something a bit beefier. I hope you've enjoyed this. There's a link to the full review, much longer review of this system, linked in the description. If you want to learn more, click subscribe as we cover this and all the subjects in data storage in 2022 and 2023, and click like if you've enjoyed the video, because it really helps me out knowing what I'm doing right and wrong. And there are links in the description to where to get hold of this system too. Other than that, I will see you next time.